Well, welcome to the Shepherd Hearted Leader podcast, where we explore topics that help strengthen your ability to care for those under your leadership. Now, today, we are going to talk with Brad Dennis and Michael Bartel about searching for God's missing kids. We're going to hear about their story and how they use the ministry to go find kids who are trafficked or missing. And we're just so excited to have this conversation. So, guys, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
We're so glad that you guys are here. And I know Emmanuel has a special relationship with F.R.E.E. International and just searching for missing kids. And so I want to, first of all, start out with your background, your story. So, Brad, let's start with you. Talk about, you're looking at me like, what? Just talk about how you came to faith and how you got involved in looking for missing kids.
Sure. Well, I'm retired military, spent 20 years in the military. And along the way in the military, I started volunteering, doing search and rescue. And that kind of followed me, right? It followed me the rest of my career, wherever I went. So from Virginia to California to Florida, wherever I was stationed, I was doing that. And it birthed a real passion in me. But really the passion that really began it was one particular case. And that was the case of Polly Glass, a little 12-year-old that was abducted and unfortunately murdered in Petaluma, California. And while I was there, I was provided the opportunity to go and assist the family and conduct the search. So that kind of continued on. I got really passionate about SAR after that event. And when I retired, her family asked if I'd come on board and help them kind of create a search and rescue effort. So I did that for quite a few years. But in the midst of all of that, I think what happens is that sometimes you ran far enough that God finally begins to slowly pull you back in. And he'll break some things along the way, I think, to really kind of get your attention and allow you to stop. And one of those was mine and my wife's relationship. It had gotten to a point that I was spending so much time doing all of this other activity that I was not really spending the necessary time with her. And it became to a point that it was really critical. It was a critical mass situation. We were either going to head off in another direction, separate, or we were going to have to make a 180-degree turn. And we both chose to make the 180-degree turn. And the whole decision is it is time for us to go to church. We both had grown up in church. We both had walked away from church. We both had gotten caught up in our own lives as young adults do, raising kids and being very invested in the things that I was doing. So we made a choice to come back together as a family. Still remember it to this day, literally 2 months into this going back to church, Vacation Bible School, my wife decided to go to Vacation Bible School every day with our 3 daughters. Mm-hmm. And on that Friday when the pastor did the open invitation, not only did our daughters come down and accept Christ, but she did as well. Obviously, pretty emotional moment because then that gave all of us an opportunity to really be together again with Christ. It was only a couple years into all of that I felt the Lord really called me back into the ministry. It was something that I had agreed to back when I was 15 years of age. Oh. And he tracked me back down to that one and started off as a youth pastor. And then eventually took over a small church in our town as their pastor. Did that for 17 years. And along the way, have been doing this. But Michael and I met along the way doing all of that work. And we were doing this thing called human trafficking. And the very first case of human trafficking that we had ever had, that I had ever worked with, was actually a young girl from my youth group. Oh, wow. She was 14 years of age. She was being sold by a pimp in our local town. Had no clue about any of that other than the fact that I knew that she was broken. I could understand that. We had long talks, but she had never let me in enough to really be able to understand and see that whole side of it until she was abducted by her pimp, taken to a local motel, sold. And as part of the search and rescue team, we were able to go in and find her. And that was my introduction to this entire world. Wow. Fast forward 10 years, and here we are today.
Wow. So, Michael, your story is a little bit different. You started
it's a
on the
lot
mission
different.
field. So, talk about your background and how you ended up working with human trafficking.
Yeah. So I'm a third generation minister. My grandmother was a church planter. Her and her two sisters planted 13 churches around the country. That kind of mindset kind of set the frame for our whole family. You know, my uncles, my dad, family, all involved in ministry, but really with a desire to go, right? As church planters, as missionaries. And my wife and I were pastoring at Purdue University. We're Chi Alpha pastors there, and pastored a campus church we planted there as well. And but my wife also ran the International Center there, which was the cultural hub of the campus, 142 countries represented there at the time. And she ran the International Students and Scholars kind of orientation program when students would come to the country. And so, my exposure to the human trafficking side of things was January of 95, interacting at Purdue University with an African student who had no status in his own country, but was so smart, his country sent him off to school. But he had to leave his wife. He'd been married only 1 year, had a 2-week-old daughter. He wasn't going to be able to see him for the next 3 to 4 years. And so, it was in that moment, my grandmother was big on prayer. When we would pick her brain, she was like, man, people love to be prayed for, whether they believe in God or not, whether they believe in another God. When people's lives are in disarray, they like to know you care enough about them that you're willing, to take their needs to your God in prayer. And the added benefit is obviously our God is real and he answers prayer. So my connection point to trafficking was with this young man. I offered to pray for him at that event. And it changed our relationship instantly. I was his new best bud. And he began to tell me about what was going on in his country. And when he went back, he wanted to be able to help his family. He had nieces that were in brothels there as young as 8 years old, and cousins and nephews that were in labor camps. And that was the first time I had ever heard about any of this. And it just, that was a moment. I'll remember everything about that moment. I remember how that room smelled. I remember everything. And that was the beginning point for my wife and I as far as, well, what are we going to do about this, right? And that's usually the question that always comes out, when you hear something like this, well, what can we do? How do we get involved? What can we do? So God started to lead us into missions. And so 20 years ago, basically this month, we started in Southern Asia with Project Rescue. And flew over. My son turned 3 on an airline flight over to India. Whole plane sang happy birthday to him. It was like a dozen different languages.
And now he's married.
And now he's married. Just got married just recently. And that was our beginning point. We had to figure out how to, knowing about something, because we were digging hard. We were learning as much as we could. But at some point, all that knowledge turns very frustrating when you can't put it into practice or make that do anything. And so that led us to India. And we come back, tell those stories. People here, churches, places all over the country, like, well, what can we do? What can we do? And that led us to put a proposal in to start what's now F.R.E.E. International here in the States back in 2007. And so we were trying to figure out the context of how to do that here, right? It's one thing to be in a red light district of 50,000 girls in India. What is it? How can we engage here? And that's where God had our paths cross. I mean, that missing child side overlapping with trafficking was not on my radar. Trafficking was, right? But I never connected the dots between missing kids and the searching for them and human trafficking. And met Brad, heard about some great work going on in Florida, put a call in, went down and worked with him at the Super Bowl in Miami. And we just, from then on, just, bonded as friends and brothers first and foremost, but just had a shared vision and heart to reach the vulnerable, the trafficked, and the missing. And so my connection to missing kids is through Brad here. And all the training we received and our team received came through Brad.
Wow. It's so amazing. So you guys both mentioned your wives were involved or had a heart for it. How has that worked out with your families over the years working in human trafficking? It takes a lot, and searching for missing kids, it takes a lot of time out of your schedules. How have you guys navigated that? You can both just kind of jump in whenever.
Yeah, I go. I think for me, I mean, my daughters grew up with it because it was such an integral part of our lives at that time. So, I mean, they literally grew up with it, hiding with our search dogs, going and always at all the meetings. And then as they got older, actually going out on searches. I mean, all of them have gone out on searches. All of them have actually gone out on surveillance stakeouts with their daddy. Got some interesting stories for that one. They've all kind of grown up with it, and it's really interesting to see where God has taken that and birthed a real compassion for vulnerable people. One of my daughters works at a school for a school teacher, but more importantly, she's been fostering kids. I have another daughter right now is interviewing to begin to foster children because she wants to do that as well. It's just really interesting to see where they have kind of taken that. And we want them to have their own space in that. For my wife, she was very integral part of our search and rescue team for a number of years. She worked a canine, so she was deployed. She deployed to Hurricane Katrina. We did a number of recoveries there. But over the years, as we got really more engaged with church, I saw her passion really birthed, and it was for the homeless. And she, of her own accord, opened up a homeless ministry out of our church. We'd go in there and cook and do Bible studies with them 3 days a week. They had a hot meal, set up a clothing closet, started doing mentoring and ministry for them. That was really where I saw her blossom. And I can base it all back to just, I think, introducing them to this world. I think that there's something valuable there when we learn how to have a real servant's heart.
Amazing. And you mentioned your family was on the airplane having birthday, so they've gone on missions. How's it worked here in the States?
Yeah, my son, all he remembers is working with us, and my daughter was born after we started all of this. And so it's all they've known, but the same way you're trying to create space for them, right? They've been exposed to more than most kids I know that aren't experiencing the negative effects of, being in those environments on a day-to-day basis. But, just try to be good parents first and foremost, a good husband first and foremost. Denise co-founded F.R.E.E., very active early on. And then when the kids got to a certain age and couldn't really travel or a lot going on, we tried to create as normal of an environment as you can, considering some of the stories they were able to tell. In fact, we were just talking about one the other day. So one of the first young lady we interacted with when we came back from India and knew Brad, was one of his earlier cases. And he calls me one day, and I get this call periodically. He's like, first words out of his mouth, "Where you at?" "Where you at?" And usually that's like, "Are you in Vegas?" Or at that time it was New Jersey. And this girl needed out. And I don't remember how old she was when you first got her, but she started being trafficked at 13 years old. Oh, wow. And she was 26 when we got the call. So half her life. And we all hopped in, to go get her. It was a pretty an emergency situation. Got her. Kids were in the car. My wife and her took a liking to her. We took her shopping. We got her in a shelter. We did all that stuff. But I remember standing outside. The kids are really young. And she was a smoker, smoked cigarettes, and she'd light up, and she's talking to the kids going, don't smoke, kids. It's bad for you. And my kids remember that, some of their earliest memories, right? Standing outside as we're witnessing to this young lady, helping her in her situation, just being present in the middle of her immediate situation, but having conversations with prostituted women about not to smoke. Those are my kids' earliest memories, right?
Good training.
But they've been active throughout the years as well, where they can, and how they've been a part of searches. My daughter, when making slime was a thing, I don't know if people remember slime making, but she loved doing that. And so many nights out of the month, we would do all-night victim service provision for law enforcement out of one of our mobile vehicles that Speed the Light provided for us. And every time we would do that, she would make a batch of slime so that as we're working with the girls, they had some tactile way to ease. So she saw a lot of value and be able to, in a simple way, provide something that was really helpful. And it wasn't just the girls. I mean, you'd see police lieutenants over there playing with the slime, everybody doing it. And then my son just came up with an idea as a kid too. That was a New Orleans Super Bowl in Vegas. If anybody's been to Vegas, they'll put pictures of the girls for sale, and card slappers will hand those out on the strip. And so we were down there one day with the kids and walking around, and he goes, "Hey, Dad," I don't know, he was like 8 years old or something at the time. And he goes, "Dad, you guys should put pictures of the kids on cards like these guys." And we're like, "Why, yes, we should," right? So we chose the top, kind of the 4 most at-risk girls down in New Orleans. We made, I think, 85,000 cards that went out into that whole city. And, just that simple, thought out of my son's brain is something we've used consistently as we can over time. So family's been very active, but we've tried to create a normality for their life. Being missionaries is one thing. Being missionaries in this space is a little different, especially for young children. And so my wife's just been a rock star, being able to create some normalcy in their lives growing up.
Stabilizing factor in the home.
That's right.
So talk about your ministry, introduction to the ministry, F.R.E.E International, and then how did it all come together?
Yeah, F.R.E.E was just the name we came up with when we got approval. We were going to do it anyway, right? I mean, we didn't know at that time with the Assemblies of God, there was no U.S. representation toward these category of people. Everybody knew what Project Rescue was, but Project Rescue was contextualized to Southern Asia. And so I was talking to Hal Donaldson of Convoy of Hope one day because we thought we were going to have to bivocational this. And we knew how to do bivocational pastoring, but we didn't really know how that would work in a missions context. And yet Hal Donaldson was the one who says, "No, I think the timing's right. You should submit your proposal." And so we did, I think somewhere in 2006. And in 2007, we started up as the first Missionaries Assembly of God had to focus on trafficking here in the States. Oh. And so we named what we were doing as a ministry to start with, and now it's its own not-for-profit, F.R.E.E. F.R.E.E stands for Find, Restore, Embrace, and Empower. So our focus was all, we believe philosophically that the church, capital C, pragmatic sense, church little c, is God's agency to reach this world. Whether, at the time we were in New York City, whether that was a CEO in the middle of New York City, or whether that was, a young lady being trafficked or in a legal brothel of Nevada, the church is the agency to reach into those areas and be present, to go. And so that's how we started, was with the intent to how on a mission side as missionaries can we work with the indigenous church of our own country, Emmanuel, whatever that might be, to reach the vulnerable and exploited in each of those cities, to find them to begin with. But then once we do, what's the so what on the backside? What is it we can provide? How can we bring healthy, godly community into these broken areas and these vulnerable areas so that God's glorified? And so that was the approach. F.R.E.E was just birthed as a concept of, outreach and discipleship, so to speak, find and restore, but all in partnership with the local church to reach the areas God has planted them.
That's powerful. And F.R.E.E is based out of Las Vegas.
That's right. Our base of operations in Vegas, but there's people all over the country that work with F.R.E.E, associate with F.R.E.E, collaborate with F.R.E.E. We got 16 years in this country of healthy, good work, and so it just increases the opportunity we have to work with a lot of great groups and churches and organizations around the country.
Amazing. And Brad, your ministry called To Rescue is based out of Pensacola, Florida?
Out of Pensacola, Florida.
And then explain how you interact with F.R.E.E International, and you're kind of do a little bit of both.
Do a little bit of both. I am on his staff as his big search director and trying to put all of these larger metropolitan search efforts together. But Call to Rescue was always a part of what we were doing with F.R.E.E. Back before it was even the big search. There was just components to that we would come in and teach people how to do what we were doing. So what we were doing back then was trying to really empower the found to go seek the lost. And we were doing that through human trafficking and through search and rescue, teaching them how to mobilize their local churches and their local communities to get engaged and involved. Everywhere that we traveled, we would bring in local churches from that area, and we would spend the time teaching them what it is that we were doing on a regular basis. So that was really the birthplace for that. It kind of started crazy enough. So my wife helped co-found this as well, Called to Rescue Ministries. And in the beginning, we were looking at just making a name change for the church and allowing all that to be wrapped under one. I mean, it was a small country church where we were already doing rescue ministries out of it with the homeless and all of that. It was where my office was for all of the search and rescue work that we were doing. And we were just looking at how can we just bring all of this under one little table. It just makes sense. I mean, the vast majority of our searchers locally were also part of our church. But over the years, it has grown into more of that education profile. And so we believe in educating, we believe in engaging and empowering the local church to get out there and get involved with the lost and marginalized in their own communities, because that's where the vulnerable live. And we have to be able to take the church outside of the four walls and get into the community.
Yep, it's amazing. So you guys both mentioned the big search, and that's where I ran into you guys. I know it was actually at a Speed the Light presentation. You guys were talking about missing kids in the United States and big searches and the vehicle. And I'm like, Nate, we got to have a big search in Minnesota sometime. And then COVID hit, and then it didn't happen. And then lo and behold, I think it was last summer that we did a big search. And you guys have a way of reeling people in, because you get out in you get out on the street and start seeing what's in your community. So for me, I was able to go on the big search last year and going to different businesses and showing them the booklet that you guys talked about, the pictures of missing kids. And hey, have you seen any of these missing kids? And they would really take interest, and they'd, wow, is there really these kids from this area? It's from this area. And yeah. And like you said, I did experience asking people if they wanted prayer, and most people, quite a few said yes. And so being able to go out in our community, find out how everybody is on board for looking for missing kids, and a lot of people are open to prayer. And so that was kind of cool. So talk about the big search. What do you guys do? And just give us the overview.
Well, good. You're the big search director. Talk about the...
Well, the need is real. 2,300 kids go missing every day in the United States. I think when a lot of people hear that statistic, it's a little shocking for them. That's just the ones that are being reported, the ones that are being recorded. But just kind of wrap your hands around that, 2,300 every single day. So that's an incredible unreached population that is out there in our country, in our cities, in our communities. These are really broken people, kids that unfortunately when they leave and when they run, they're running from something or running to something, which means that they have a real need in their life that for whatever reason hasn't been met. And unfortunately, there's too many predators out there willing to meet that need. I believe the church is a better place to meet that need, right? I found truly my needs being met through my Lord and Savior without me having to go out here and look for it everywhere else. And I just want to introduce these kids to it. So the big search is all about mobilizing the local community, again, to go out there and conduct a search. We started at a couple of different levels. We have what is called the Lost Sheep Project. Lost Sheep Project is like a 2 or 3 day event in which we literally just mobilize the local community and let them get out there and do exactly what you did. Go canvas, experience this, see the impact that it can really have, and learn how you can really lean into that and engage. Then then we're ready to do a big search. And the big search is a week-long event where we come in with our full staff of people. These are trained people. Don't have to have any specific trainings, but we have some really cool skill-setted people. We have missionaries, we have pastors, but we also have retired law enforcement, retired military, special forces people, moms and dads of all ilk. They all come out with that training and teach that local community how to do what we do. And really, that's what this is about. How can you build this in your own local area? Frankly, as far as I'm concerned, there's no reason in the world that any family or any law enforcement agency should ever have to call us to travel and fly to their area to conduct a search for their kid. We should be able to build that organically right there in their own community.
And you guys have expanded quite a bit this year. So what cities are you in, and where have we done big searches? I say we, I threw we in there because
You're part of the we?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful shirt, by
Vegas.
the way, you got there.
Thank you.
Yeah, look at that shirt.
From some good friends.
This is a shepherd. Where have we been? Wow. So where we are growing, let's put it that way, first and foremost, is obviously Las Vegas and Pensacola, Florida, because those are our two major home bases. But now we have movements in North Alabama, North Mississippi, Wichita, Kansas, here, obviously in Minnesota, and all the way out. And New Jersey. Thank you. That's right. New Jersey. We just started that. And now in Alaska. Yeah. Alaska. How about that?
Yeah, and Tennessee as well is looking to grow. Yeah.
I just remember hearing all the people when we were in Las Vegas for the big search, how many people came from different parts of the country. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It's God's, and we're just trying to do our best to follow his leading.
Yeah.
So what do you do for ongoing? So we got big searches. What do you do in between big searches and then the small searches, I guess?
It's always taking cases. So we average, last year we took in over 260 cases of missing from different agencies around the country. And that's a heavy lift because that involves open source intelligence gathering, sometimes actual physical boots on the ground searching, always case advocacy, which is just a fancy name for ministering to that family and really loving them through that whole process, whatever that's going to look like. Unfortunately, we just had one just to kind of give the listeners an understanding of it. We were called to a missing 4-year-old. Unfortunately, the child was found drowned. Our job was to still be there after the find and continue to minister to the family, even to the point of working with local churches to ensure that funeral service was taken care of, and then actually doing the funeral service for them because they leaned into who the shepherds were and what the shepherds were about. So it's an ongoing process.
Yep.
And there's, as part of the shepherds, there's so many different groups and organizations that are part of that task force that carry an aspect of the different things we're all doing, right? So we have people who run shelters and tiny home villages to do restorative care and lives have been exploited. We've got school assembly programs represented on the team, been in front of over 600,000 students. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of different things that all are coming together accomplishes. So the day-to-day depends on, what people's background is, but everyone's very active on a day-to-day for different things. In Las Vegas, we have ongoing stuff all the time that are happening, victim services that are provided, drop-in center where we work with, ladies who just need a reprieve from the street. The day-to-day depends on, that phone call that morning and who it is you're interacting with and working with at that moment. So
was it last year, Sound of Freedom came out? And it really created a buzz and awareness in the United States about trafficking. And talk about how what is actually happening is different than maybe what people think is happening from Sound of Freedom. I'm looking at you.
I'll let you do the bulk of the answer to that. But I think the positive of any awareness is it goes back to the original question that got me involved and I'm sure got you involved, this church involved, is when you learn something like that's going on, a response to helpers, a natural response to those who want to help is what can we do? What can we do? So the elevation of that as an issue generated a great response of what we can do.
Yep.
There's drawbacks because then the other questions are, is that what this looks like, right? And do you know these guys, or whatever the setup might be? But then I'll let you answer that. And I'll say this to start with, that was a big part when we moved from India to here, right, to do this work, was it can look like anything in any community, rural, suburban, or urban, and the missing kid piece is a big part of that, right? What does this look like here was something I had to answer before I could be effective and before we could begin to put a shepherd's type concept into place. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really incredible organizations across our country and across the world that are really engaged in this space because it's needed, right? I mean, the issue is so expansive that it's going to literally take an army to address it. So I applaud any of the organizations and groups that get involved. I would say that the one side that is always a cautionary tale when people bring up these type of movies, and it's whether it's that movie or Taken or any of the others, it's been a genre of them that has been produced ever since human trafficking became more of a buzzword, which I love that it's a buzzword. I love that people are addressing it and talking about it, is that this issue is so complex that it cannot be boiled down to one particular scene in a movie or one concept or ideal in a movie. It's just too widespread and it's too complex. And unfortunately, what it does is that we are products of what we're taught. We are products of what we see and view. And if all I'm seeing and viewing is that one concept of what trafficking is, then I'm missing all of the other victims that are out there. I'm missing all the other opportunities to really engage in this space. And so I just caution people that when you watch it, just understand that this is a much more complex issue than what you're witnessing, and to really get the education about what it really does look like.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the problem. What does human trafficking and missing children, what does it look like in the United States?
Well,
everyone has their concepts of what's happening, so what have you noticed?
One is a growing epidemic. We have not staunched the flow at all. We've been engaged and involved in this space for a millennia, but really it's been a 20-year focus ever since Congress passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act in 2000. So 24-year focus. And we have not staunched that at all. If anything, we're really now beginning to peel the layers of that onion back and starting to see what it really looks like. And so it obviously has two major components. It has sex trafficking, which is what we normally will see when it comes to TV and all those shows. It seems to be more glamorous, for lack of a better term. And we have labor trafficking, which is the more underreported one. And that's where we have men, women, and children that are being engaged in some form of labor against their will. They're either not getting paid for it, there's a debt that they're trying to work off, something along those lines. Unfortunately, here in our country, we can see all of those things. A number of years ago, the State Department literally labeled every country in the world with one of three labels. They called them a source country, a destination country, or a transit country. And one of the things that I think everyone in our country would recognize is that we're all three. Our borders are very porous, which allows so much of this influx of trafficking to be brought into our country. We are definitely a destination. We have the demand, and the demand is high in this country for exploitation, which is a very sad state, but it's just the truth. And I think the other piece that will obviously shock some listeners is that we are a source country. That these aren't just men, women, and children that are brought into our country and being sold. There are our own men, women, and children that are being sold as well. It can be at every level. So it can be at the huge organized crime level, like you might see on TV. It can be at the criminal kind of gangs, the big kind of cartels. It can be at the local street gang level. But it can also be what's called familial trafficking, which is, to me, some of the most horrendous, because that's moms, dads, uncles, for whatever reason, in some state of poverty or need, have chosen to exploit their own children. And we are seeing that more and more and more. As the economic situation in our country deteriorates, I believe that we're going to see even more of that.
Wow. And so solution-wise, what's the solution? I mean, we go looking for missing kids, but what have you guys seen as a solution to this?
Well, I believe that it's Jesus Christ, right? And we know that, and we can. That's the easy God answer, especially on the podcast, right? But the truth of it is that we really need our shepherds across our communities that are responsible for flocks to also be responsible for their communities and be responsible for where God placed them. So we have to be willing to reach out to those that are marginalized right there in their own community. One of the things that we have seen as real benefit, and it has taken 2 years to see this, is in our own local area with the engagement of law enforcement, the engagement of our piece to it, but more importantly, us wrapping these kids and families around churches that are willing to come on board and walk with them through this. We have seen a 200 amount of cases that have dropped.
Wow.
We were at 860 in 1 year. 2 years later, we were at 560.
Wow.
And that's just because we are embedding churches with these families after we locate these children and say, get alongside of these kids and families and find out why they're running, what is the real needs there, start learning how to embrace them and bring them into your fold so that they get some of these other needs, attention, affection, love, whatever that is, through the church.
And what is the stat? If a kid runs, how quick are they trafficked?
Oh, well, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children states that, I forgot exactly, 1 in 3 within 72 hours. Within 72 hours, they are going to be approached with either a survival sex situation or a predator trying to groom them.
And what have you guys noticed with survivors? How has that long-term care been, and how?
And that's the thing. I mean, we were talking about this before the cameras are rolling, right? I mean, what we have taught among our crew, which we've been talking about today, is the importance of presence, right? So Psalm 46:1, God is our refuge and our strength, very present in time of trouble. Well, God left his spirit with his church. So it's the role of the church to be very present in this country, in that neighborhood's time of need. So presence is everything, but it's like any relationship, all that's complicated. I mean, one of our great stories we like to tell about a young lady that was rescued by a big search effort, I think 3 years ago. Still working with her, right? There's a lot of patience and a lot of sacrifice that goes into helping just one person, because the background of that person, all the stuff they've gone through, whatever that trust issues were, all that rolls into now moving forward there, right? And bad habits, manipulations, and everything else. And so in the process of the church being present, that's part of, shepherd's training and everything else, is how to be healthy present in the middle of this, and how do you move somebody down this road. But it's a lifetime event. In fact, we were just, that first young lady we talked about, that was 2010 probably when we went and got her. Brad got her 10 years or more previous to that, had gotten her help multiple times in between that and when we got her, and both of us have helped her multiple times since that. So she's in her 40s now, but this has been the most healthy time for her, right? Like, I don't think you or I have gotten a call in 2 or 3 years with her moving forward. So it just is, the complication of all that goes into exploiting that person also is the amount of time it takes to, I don't know if there's ever a decomplication, but move somebody from that into a healthier space. So we got stories of young ladies that are doing great 6 months out, and usually it's because they had something to draw from in a healthy family relational environment before the exploitation happened. And then you got those who've never known a day of their life where they haven't been exploited, ignored, abused, whatever it is. That's going to take a whole lot longer period of time. But I believe God's using some of these stories as well to change the church, right?
Yep.
So when we first got involved, we worked heavily all our life with Teen Challenge stuff, and you'd hear these great stories from Teen Challenge of, God healing them at an altar, no longer addicted. Some of my favorite stories. So then the questions come, what's your success rate with the girls that come out? It's not the same approach. And a lot of that can be explained, training, all that kind of stuff. But I also think in part, can God heal a person who for 18 years have never known anything but exploitation and neglect? Absolutely he can. But I think God is not only using the church to minister healing and help long-term to these girls, but he's using these girls and family stories to teach the church what it is to love, what that sacrifice is to bring somebody from that situation into a healthy life moving forward in Christ Jesus. So that's what we've seen. Healthy churches are attracted to what we do because they know what it means to be present, whether that's kingdom builders or whatever it might be to be present in their city, but also that those traits we all need individually and as a church: patience, kindness, loving your enemy as yourself. All these things have to become part of our approach to engaging our community. And you can't learn those unless you're rubbing up against some pretty complicated relationships that you get to be Jesus in, moving them toward him.
It's interesting. Jesus moved with compassion. And I think in the American church overall, we're probably lacking compassion. And when we get to interface with vulnerable people who are really in tough places in their lives, it does do something. Like you guys talked about it at the beginning of the podcast, how hearing the story of what people are going through really breaks something in you and gets you on mission. And so I think that's exciting. One of the last things I would just want to ask about is you guys have the shepherd, like on our shirts. It doesn't say your ministries. It doesn't say Free International or Call to Rescue. It says the shepherds. And that was something that really stood out to me that I really appreciated. Talk about that and why we wear the lost sheep shepherd on our
Well, because we don't
uniform.
want it to be about any specific organization. This is to glorify God. And I think that when people that are needing compassion can see that approach and begins to wrap their arms around that approach, they see that they are welcome, regardless of what that baggage looks like, regardless of what that brokenness looks like. They can see that they're going to be welcomed in that setting. More importantly, it's also, to me, it's a view to the church, right? It's a reminder to the church of what we are truly called to. Jesus said it best, what man amongst you, right? That doesn't have 100 sheep won't put 99 in that good pasture here to go out there to find that one that strayed away. And we want to see the church, again, see the found, go seek the lost. If that was Jesus's mandate when he was here, was I come to seek the lost, then that's our mandate now, whether it's the big C or the little C.
Yep.
I think having the shepherds was all about losing our identity in this and refocusing on what the identity was supposed to be really all about, which was God.
Yeah, that will preach. Yeah. That'll preach. You say, I don't know if I remember the saying quite correctly, but it's like, don't pass over one need to reach another. Talk about that.
Yeah. I think everyone that comes is ready to go do a rescue. And one of the things we always tell them is our job is not to go kick in doors. That's someone else's. Our job is to bring that compassion and bring that love and bring that grace. And we start that by not stepping over one need to get to another. You come to these events and you want to go find that missing kid. You want to go find that child that's been trafficked and exploited. But along the way, you're going to come across an awful lot of needs while you're out there. You need to be faithful in that need that the Lord just put in front of you before he can trust you with another precious soul that you thought that you were coming there to rescue.
So it might be someone who's homeless or broken or a business owner who
could be a teammate.
Needs prayer, could
team
be a
member,
teammate.
Law enforcement officer.
Last time that we were here in Minnesota, one of our own team members lost family members during the fires over in Hawaii. And so the entire event that we were here was really all about ministering to her.
It's amazing. So what do you see as the greatest need and challenge to getting churches mobilized and involved?
Well, there's all sorts of things, even as a shepherd of, you and Nate of this church, kingdom minders mentality is so awesome, right? Because anytime the church can be present in the middle of the need, God's going to honor that and bless that with fruit, right? But I think some of the biggest obstacles are in that identity piece. That's why the shepherds are so valuable to our whole team. Is we all want to go, hey, look, we want to put our stamp on. We're a healthy church. We're healthy this. These are things we want to be a part of. Convoy is really good at this too, right? Creating kind of a neutral space that all churches can come and own, right? Yeah. So for us, the big searches are a big part of that. It's like, this is something the city can own, and not just an individual church with a well-known reputation, but that everyone can own that. Early on when we started F.R.E.E. out in New York City, we'd get a lot of those kind of questions like, oh, you guys are doing this. Do you guys partner with? And they'd name a very famous church or another famous church. And we were working with those churches, but I knew as soon as I said that, then the response was always, well, then you're doing a good job. Good for you. You must be doing something right. When the response I wanted was, how can we get involved? What is our role in this? And I think that's just something that every time, every city we go into, every place we go, I don't see it as cynical as much as it's just a way we've always done things depending on our church. So creating a new arena for people who can be present in the middle of the need. In Vegas, we have a lot of weekly rental places, right? All over the city. You've seen them. Yep. They're everywhere. Just working with churches as a missions organization to adopt these weekly rental places to be present there, right? Obviously, we have ability to come in and help in a trafficking situation, but if that's all we're waiting for is a trafficking situation, there's no impact going to happen on that city. That's why, Brad was even saying, how do we get our church families adopting families in these vulnerable situations? In that, trust is built, capacity is built, understanding of what trafficking and all the complications, because none of this happens in a vacuum, right? So how do we enter these spaces as a faith community? And I think once that's understood, we've seen a lot of great success. But if you're waiting to understand it before you engage it, that's where that disconnect is. And that's why with the shepherds, with our organizations, we're trying to create those on-roads so that people feel comfortable entering spaces they're not used to. And in the middle of that, seeing transformation happen. So I think it's that. I think it's just, in general, churches understanding the dynamic of working together for a bigger cause. Convoy does it through their events. Our big searches are meant to do the same thing. In fact, we got a full-blown partnership with Convoy now because, we share that desire and that ability to build a bridge from areas of a city the church usually is in into areas they're not used to being in. And so yeah, I think that for me, it's just that building that trust with churches so that they can be a part of something without thinking they got to put their own logo on everything that's going on.
So powerful. Last thought for shepherd-hearted leaders. We have a lot of people who listen to the podcast who are pastors of other churches, or maybe they're on Team Emmanuel here, involved in leadership or just part of the congregation. Just give one snippet advice of what would you say to the shepherd-hearted leader getting involved in this space?
You first.
Oh,
you got it.
I knew it. I had a really good one though. So I'll just tell a really quick story. So at the church, one day my wife is doing the cooking for the homeless, and I had a gentleman that we'd never seen before come into the church. Came up to me and he says, "Are you the pastor here?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "Who's the most important person in your life?" And I gave, the really cool churchy answer, right? Jesus Christ is the most important person in my life. He says, "Oh, okay." And he started to turn around. And I said, "Well, what answer were you expecting?" He says, "Well, to me, the most important person in your life is the person standing in front of you, because that's the person that Jesus put there." And I'm like, wow. Okay, sir, you just preached to me. I've never seen that man again in my life, but that has had a very lasting effect to me, that as a shepherd, that's supposed to be the leadership mantra that I should be taking with me everywhere that I go. And that should be what I'm trying to pass down to our folks, is be present with that person that is right in front of you. Meet those needs first before you try to go off and meet someone else. Amazing.
I mean, that's perfect. And that's really the mindset we try to bring to this, right? And so, I say this line, but I'm going to close my part with the other is people are always like, man, how do you find so many of these kids? And we've found hundreds of them over the years. How do you find them? And we got skill sets, we got all the stuff the shepherds have available to those who want to be involved. But the simple answer is we were looking for them, right? Mm-hmm. You're never going to find what you're not looking for. And I think that idea coupled with the being present, like he was saying, the person in front. And I think even as a church leader, as a pastor, lots of people have wanted, especially coming out of movies like you just mentioned, hey, how do we mobilize to go slave hunting, really is what they're wanting to do. When we have in all our churches, 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 4 to 5 boys, by the time I hit 18, have already been molested. Those include people in our own churches, right? I've had an 88-year-old woman in a walker in front of my wife and I weeping. She was abused by her dad from 8 to 18. Never told her story. For those 70 years, never told a story. And she was, she wasn't trafficked. She had been a healthy part of her church, but she never felt there was a space. Whether there was or wasn't, she didn't think there was a space to be able to get healing for that, right? It took 70 years for her to tell that story. I think as shepherd-minded leaders, we need to be willing to, it doesn't have to be provocative, but have space to have those who are going through hurt, domestic abuse, whatever it might be, that are in our churches, that we create a space and an overt conversation where they know there's a safe place in our churches to have that conversation. I know Brad's own testimony, hearing, hey, you're in a safe place is what helped him, some of what he went through. I know churches, a lot of our trafficked survivors even would feel a lot healthier in our churches if there was a space to be able to recognize that exploitation and create a place of healing in that church internally without even having to leave that walls, have that conversation in our church first.
So awesome. Well, thank you guys for this conversation. What a powerful, moving, shepherd-hearted leader conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode, we would appreciate a comment or share and share it with other people. Tell them about the podcast. And if you're interested in getting involved in searching for missing kids, we'll leave resources and links in the description. And until next time, keep leading well.